right, so this is the Innovations in Aquaculture panel. Thank you very much for sitting and listening to our innovative speakers. The format is going to be as follows. We're going to have the panelists introduce themselves, briefly mention, or talk about their companies and their areas of expertise. And then we're going to have the panel discussion. I have a few guiding questions that I've shared with the panelists ahead of time, but feel free to ask your own questions. So thank you very much. We're going to get started. All right, my name is Anoushka Concepcion. I am a regional aquaculture coordinator with NOAA Fisheries for the greater Atlantic regions. So that's Virginia up to Maine. So I'm all the way from the East Coast. So it's nice to be here. And for those that may know me, I used to be with Connecticut Sea Grant for 14 years, but just recently transitioned to NOAA. So welcome. So I'll hand it over to my panelists, let them introduce themselves. Go ahead. You can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, I'm Tom Mumford, and some of you may have heard me last night. I gave a little short talk at the reception last night that we had. I'm up in the state of Washington and have worked in various guises with seaweed since about 1965. Taught at the University of Washington. I have worked with the State Department of Natural Resources on seaweed aquaculture and for preservation, conservation, restoration activities. I have been involved with the aquaculture of things like Moriel and Pyropia, Gracilaria, and I've never actually grown kelp, believe it or not. My emphasis right now is more on what I'm going to call the social sciences, that is getting people involved, getting people invested in what they're doing with kelp, aquaculture, conservation, and so forth. And also working a bit on research on carbon fiber rods and also on the extraction of rare earth elements from seawater using seaweeds. Those are my two sort of go-to programs I'm working for right now.
My name is Moriel Arango. I am the CEO of a very small startup based in Bend, Oregon, Blade Runner Energy. We are in the process of developing a technology that will harness the power in the natural flow of water without the need for a dam or an impoundment. Up until now, our focus has been mainly unidirectional flows, so riverine applications. But over the past year, we have been involved with an oyster farmer here in Humboldt Bay, where we're trying to study and understand how we can leverage our existing technology and transform that into something that can function in the bidirectionality of tidal currents. Our system generally has been pretty small. We're looking at remote riverine communities in Alaska, Central America, South America. So we find that it's pretty applicable to take that smaller sized device and see how we can apply it to small aquaculture operations. So we've been coming down here to understand the environment, understand power loads, and become more knowledgeable about aquaculture overall. I probably know the least about seaweed from anybody here, but we're focused more on understanding that power requirement and demands.
That's awesome. And I'm Tyler Buckingham. I'm with Blue Robotics. Blue Robotics manufactures accessible ocean technology. So we're talking about robots that can go in the water that we can all use. I can even use them, and I have no technical background. And the reason why we're here is because we see a tremendous opportunity before us as a community. That's a beautiful horn. Let's take that in. We see a tremendous opportunity in this world of seaweed. We see an optimism, a looking at the future in a way that we can actually live more sustainably on this planet, and that we can do it utilizing in a responsible way our marine systems. And so this festival is just absolutely awesome. We're thrilled to be here, and I'm looking forward to a conversation with these luminaries right here.
Thank you very much. So my first question for the panelists, it really has to do with their background and their knowledge base. And so the science and technologies your companies possess and your expertise can be used in a variety of applications. How do you see your expertise addressing problems specific to aquaculture?
Go ahead and start on that one. Boy, that's a broad question. My expertise actually spans what I call the three pillars for aquaculture: permitting, and the issues having to do with permits, often social in nature. This middle one is sort of the actual physical growing, which is mostly what I think a lot of people here are involved with. And the third one, which is I'm delighted to see, is what do you do with the seaweed? What kind of products? What do you make? What does it cost to make? What do you make of it? What can you use it for? And I'm involved a little bit in all three of those. More now on, I'm going to call the permitting end of the thing. It's hard to get people going off the ground and get them in the water right now. There was a lot of pushing and shoving going on about how do you get a permit for a farm. State of California is probably the epitome to me of how you can have a lot of different things you've got to go through to get a permit to actually get a farm in the water. Not much better in the state of Washington. Places like Alaska are kind of going for it. Maine is going for it. So it depends a great deal upon the local areas. So my expertise is in somewhat all three of those.
So I'm a mechanical engineer by background education, and my emphasis has always been renewable energy. So that's where our technology overall has been growing to understand how can we displace fossil fuel consumption in remote riverine areas, and then starting to understand what is the power requirement in aquaculture and how is that power satisfied. We've become aware of the fact that you either have areas like here where electricity prices are rather high, but you do have an immense resource in marine energy. So how can we tap into that so that aquaculture overall can become more carbon negative, because it is already one of the least energy intensive practices out there, but there are still areas where you're either using diesel in some platforms or you are paying high prices for electricity, and your energy overall might not be that reliable. So how can we address both, that reliability of things, displace diesel consumption? So it's just making the aquaculture sector overall more carbon negative, or could get to the point where it become carbon negative. That is where my expertise as a mechanical engineer just comes into play with aquaculture.
Well, the first thing I would say is if you look out the window, when you look at the water, we could probably characterize the land out there and all the boats. We can see them. But as soon as your eyes hit the water, you just see the surface. And all of this farming, all of this stuff that we're celebrating here happens beneath the surface. And so if you're trying to farm there, if you were to farm terrestrially, you would walk the fields. You would want to understand, if you were a farmer, what is happening on the farm in the most intimate ways. That is the craft, that is the art of farming terrestrially. And the same thing is true in a marine setting. You want to be able to walk your farm. And so what we hope is that marine technologies, and specifically accessible marine technologies that are affordable, that are robust, that can be used in a challenging marine setting, can help make kelp farming and other forms of regenerative aquaculture more efficient and thereby more accessible to more farmers. And that's the way the Blue Robotics, I think, plays into the current aquaculture ecosystem.
And so we'll stay with you, but can you give us an example of a type of project that you've been working on that sort of demonstrates what you were just describing?
Yeah. So actually, Ocean Rainforest is in the house, and we have partnered with them in a technology partnership, and we're utilizing their kelp farm, which is off the coast of Santa Barbara, as a technology test bed. And the first thing we're trying to learn is to walk a mile in the kelp farmer's shoes. What are the challenges associated with kelp farming? And actually, one of the interesting challenges, in addition to the technology challenges, is communicating, per Tom's comment about the politics and the community work, sharing with the community what kelp farming is. So we're actually partnering with a cartoonist to depict in graphics a kelp farm underwater in a beautiful 3D way with like pop out, if you've seen those National Geographic cutaway images. So we're trying to produce one of those of that farm to show how kelp farming works and how technology can be used on it and how monitoring works, and what happens to the kelp and the lifestyle of it, life cycle of the kelp. So I think that we play a role throughout. We want to see this industry succeed, and we want to facilitate partnerships any way we can. In some cases, it's our ROV doing inspections of the gear underwater. Again, all that farming equipment is all underwater. If you're a farmer, you want to know what's going on your farm. I mean, it's like that is what you think about all the time as a farmer. So our equipment provides a lens into the sea for that, for the farmer's use. And as well, we partner on other things that are not strictly technology related.
And again, I have another follow-up question for you. Yeah. So in terms of safety, because kelp farming, doing anything on the water can be very dangerous, especially with certain weather conditions, and in the wintertime, which is when kelp is farmed. So can your technology also be used to assist farmers if they have to go out and inspect their lines? Yeah, absolutely. Particularly like in Maine, for example, I think our leading state producer of kelp right now, they grow in the wintertime. So if you're a lobsterman, typically these farms are small, like a lobsterman kind of farms in the off season, make a little extra money. It's cold out there, and if you have like a gear foul up, or you need to just inspect your gear, you certainly do not want to go through the risk and expense of putting a diver in the water. I mean, that is dramatically harder to do. And again, this technology can absolutely do that today, right now. And I would stress that the cool thing about technology, and we all know this, is that it's always changing, and it's getting easier and more accessible as we speak. So what it is today, tomorrow it'll be even easier to do that. Thank you. All right. Question for you, Moriel. Again, can you provide a specific example of, for example, how your technology is being utilized on that oyster farm that you talked about earlier?
Yeah, so right now our tidal device is still under concept and design. We've just started on this about a year ago, but a big part of the project has been to come and understand, like I was mentioning, what are the power requirements so we can size the device appropriately. Other things have been engaging with local stakeholders to understand what are their concerns. Obviously here, Humboldt, when you think about marine energy, perhaps you think about big offshore wind applications, which that in itself has been rather controversial here, but making people aware of the fact that marine energy does not have to be to that scale. So smaller devices are not going to be, the implications behind smaller devices are going to be very different, but making people aware of the fact that there are smaller forms of harnessing energy outside of big 1 megawatt scale offshore wind. So that's been kind of a large part of our project so far, has just been making people aware of what we're doing, understanding their concerns, so that we make sure that we design something that people will actually implement, and that we're not just taking a mechanical engineering approach and making something that is super innovative, but people are going to be like, no, I'm not going to use that. I can't put that out in the middle of the bay because you haven't spoken with, the Army Corps of Engineering, or you haven't spoken with the Fish and Wildlife folks, and that's going to be a problem for me. So it's just really kind of understanding that whole ecosystem so that we make sure that we design something that will be implemented. And that's been, it kind of spans both the tidal application to the riverine application. You can't just assume that you can show up with a solution and tell a community up in Alaska, hey, I have something that you can drop into your river. And they're like, well, how do I maintain this? You're going to leave this here in a really remote area, and then you're going to leave. So just kind of the workforce development behind that. So it's been, that's been the big emphasis behind our work here in Humboldt, is just becoming more knowledgeable and making sure we design something that will function. And that's, meeting folks from Blue Robotics, they need power, so how can we start to also play alongside
and address their needs as well.
And address their needs.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And Tom, you have decades of experience and knowledge, and you can get to your comment, but something to think about if you could also address is providing the audience with an example of, something that you helped, with, in Washington State, maybe troubleshooting certain challenges.
Sure. So at the beginning of COVID, rockfish were listed in Puget Sound and Sailor Sea. And NOAA, in their infinite wisdom, said, we need to write a recovery plan, and quickly discovered that the whole key to rockfish recovery was kelp. Juvenile rockfish only recruit in kelp beds. And so there was a fair amount of money put into devising a kelp restoration, conservation, preservation plan for the Sailor Sea. And I was there. I was part of that and worked. So most of my COVID thing was spent on Zoom writing that plan. Now what I'm doing is the plan is in place, and we've hired a full-time person who does nothing but keep track of all the different dozens of different projects involving kelp restoration, preservation, and so forth in the state of Washington and up and down the coast as well. And I'm kind of the behind-the-scenes prodding people. I call myself the connector. So I'm trying to get people to think about conservation, restoration, aquaculture, how those things work together, and they do, and how to make things happen at the research level, the local citizen science level, agency level, and the communities. How do you get them all working together to accomplish rockfish recovery, healthy kelp beds, healthy oceans, and a good sense of well-being about where you live. So that's kind of what I've been, and it's very ephemeral kind of a thing. A lot of phone calls, a lot of schmoozing out in the, in the hallway kind of stuff. But that's,
So just to kind of add to that, the regulatory environment for aquaculture can be very unclear in many states. How would you advise potential applicants on trying to navigate through that process?
Ooh, there was just a talk the other day that somebody gave that had a list of things you should do as an applicant. Everything from, but a whole lot of it had to do with communication, talking with the regulators, talking with your local community, building up what we call social license, and that is everybody trusting everybody else. Frankly, by the time you get to actually applying for a permit, you shouldn't have to blink an eye. It should just happen. You should have greased the skids well beforehand. You shouldn't have any opposition, in theory, with that. Do your homework well before you get to actually putting the application in the slot for that kind of a thing. Social license is a big, big deal. In the state of Washington, it's also part of the deal is dealing with treaty tribal rights that we have in the state of Washington. Not so much, I don't think, here and so forth, but you have to consider all the tribal elements in this as well. Upland property owners, the regulators. Communication is the big thing. Communication and building trust. When you boil it all down. Speaking as a granddad and a dad, that rings.
Can you just sort of elaborate more in terms of how you would communicate? What would you suggest, or how would you suggest that applicants communicate with regulators? Call them up on the phone, take them out to the site?
Yes, yes, and yes. Yes, yes, and yes, yeah. You have to get to know these people personally because my experience has been that there are regulations, and then there are the people that do the regulations, and you're having to deal with the people as much as the regulations themselves. And so you get the need to at least be on a good speaking basis with the people who you're actually going to be doing it with. Okay, that's important. And that takes time. It's not a simple thing. It's not a one meeting, oh, everything is good. You have to keep after it.
Do you also, because your background in science as well, do you also provide, like when you talk with folks in the community, with regulatory agencies, explaining the science behind aquaculture as well?
Absolutely. The science and everything, from working like on ectocarpus photoreceptor systems, up to, the value of kelp in an ecosystem, talking about how much kelp carbon ends up in a rockfish. Turns out a lot. In a guillemot, in a oyster, in a urchin. And we all kind of know these things, but many regulators don't understand all these connections. And so education, the science behind that is critical. And be able to talk that talk intelligently and not get buried so far into the nitty-gritty, but be able to actually make it relevant to those regulators.
And how would you tie in with what the other panelists do in terms of, again, communicating with the audience or with communities, with regulatory agencies? Because this is something new, right?
I think, like, for instance, the robotics thing, is critical because I have hearing aids. I dove way too much, and I don't hear very well anymore from diving. I understand you want to minimize diving. You're the answer to that, minimizing how much time you have to spend underwater. And to be able to look and to see, observe, not only as the farmer, but as the regulator, as the person who's watching and seeing, is things doing what they're supposed to be doing.
I just want to address that. Do you mind? Yeah. You said you want to minimize diving. I say you want to maximize diving. You want to get rid of the diving you don't need to do and dive when you need to. There's still a role for putting divers in the water to experience the space for sure. But a lot of the kind of industrial diving on a farm that you're going to be doing up and down, it is very hard on you. So just wanted to clarify that. We're pro-diving here at Blue Robotics.
And have your ears clear when you do it. And things like, I'm totally tangled up in like tank culture and these kinds of things where the whole game is energy. How much energy does it take? And try to get the cost down. And how do you minimize energy costs or be clever about using the energy on site, tidal energy, turbines, all these sorts of things, and get away from carting diesel fuel halfway across the ocean to do something. That's all part of the game. So we get the cost down, carbon cost as well as just the dollar cost on these things. And talking and getting the engineers, talking with the farmers, talking with the biologists. That's the game.
Yeah, like we were talking earlier, Moriel, about the blue economy.
Yeah.
And how carbon intensive really the blue economy really is.
No, and adding to that, so there was a big initiative sponsored by the Department of Energy, the Water Power Technology Office specifically, which is powering the blue economy. And it's been around for 5 to 6 years, and it kind of shines a light on the lack of information. So when you were talking about communication, so DOE obviously is very focused on engineering, and the companies that they fund are engineering companies. Well, a lot of us, we don't know anything about aquaculture. So how do we engage with people that practice aquaculture and understand their needs? And then folks in the aquaculture sector realizing like, yeah, my practices do have energy consumption associated with it, and what technologies are out there that we could use to minimize that, or if they're not there, they don't exist, who can we engage with in that engineering sector so that they start to think about our problems and innovate around that. And that bridge is still kind of crumbling, or this just doesn't really exist so much. And it kind of was, back in February, there was an aquaculture symposium here in the area, and I posed a question to a panel, brought up the initiative from the DOE, and nobody on that panel had heard about powering the blue economy. So that kind of really highlighted that lack of information transfer, and asking you, Anoushka, if NOAA and DOE collaborate and speak to each other, and you kind of said no, not that much.
We're working on that, but yes.
No, exactly. I mean, those are channels that need to be opened, and conversations need to occur so that at least from that higher level of federal funding, we're focusing our efforts in the right direction, and it's not all split up. So,
right. Have more streamlined conversations and collaborations, for sure. So, would you like to add anything to?
I'm sorry.
Would you like to add anything to?
Well, I mean, only to highlight what you were saying specifically. I think we can all say that our society, kind of broadly, even outside of aquaculture or the blue economy, we tend to be very siloed in our lives, and as people, as stakeholders here, as humans who are interested in kelp and seaweed, as professionals who might be interested in farming or might have another professional avenue into this space, I think it's just so important that we communicate with each other, not always in a conference setting. Like, we need to be just open to listening to each other, learning from each other, and we don't do that enough, and it's underinvested in, and that's one of the reasons why, NOAA's massive. They do so much great work, so is the Department of Energy. And it's like, to add on top of that you have to know what everybody else is doing is impossible, because there's so many things. But we do have to work on that, because we're inefficient, and sometimes we're contradictory. California, the state we're in, we have ambitious goals for climate that I think probably everyone in this room would stand up and support. Yet we're also one of the more restrictive states when it comes to starting a kelp farm. Why is that? What's up with that? So we also have to get our stuff together and go to Sacramento and be like, we got to get our values on climate need to make sense when it comes to innovating the blue economy. So that's my answer.
Thank you. Thank you. So I would like to turn it over. I have a bunch of other questions, but I wanted to give the audience a chance to ask our panelists a question. Yeah.
Thank you, Rod Fujita. Just building on Tyler's last point there, and I'm wondering, Tom, you expressed interest in the various uses of seaweed, right? What do you make it out? When you think about all the many things that you can make out of seaweed, food, bioplastics, biostimulants, soil amendments, right? Biogas. What do you think is the most climate mitigating product use class, right? When you think about costs, say you're plugging into the present dirty grid. We don't have all the innovative energy technologies on tap yet. If you were going to choose, what would you make out of seaweed that would give you the biggest climate mitigation bang for your buck?
Well, that's a loaded question. That's a very good question. So the question is, what is the most energy efficient or would contribute most to, say, to the blue economy? Yeah, and there's this, and we all know there's this panoply of products that we can be doing now. One we haven't even talked about is carbon sequestration. Big issue. Me personally, I'm waiting to see how that comes out. I'm not totally convinced that that's going to be a big thing. Mainly because I don't know that we totally understand what the costs of that are going to be. I'm not even, one, sure it can be done, and two, what's the cost going to be? And the other thing that we all need to be thinking about is, so we're going to have a kelp farm the size of Canada to do this? And where is it going to be, and what are the costs, basically, of doing that thing? To say nothing of it, can you even do it in its own right? So to answer your question, where do we go? I think it's going to be all these things in combination. It's not going to be any one that stands out. Bioplastics, to me, are a really intriguing possibility that we've got. And given that we've not only got petroleum-based efforts there, but we got the other end of it, whereas all the plastic ends up in us and everywhere else. How do you get around that? That might be one of the more interesting things. The other one that I'm, having a farm in the Midwest, part farmer, biostimulants in agriculture, I think can make a huge difference in how we deal with terrestrial agriculture at some point. All of these things are going to be talking about scale.
Can you explain to the audience for who may not know what biostimulants are?
Biostimulants are basically taking seaweed and treating it in some way, and correct me if I'm wrong on this thing, applied to terrestrial plants, and it can do a whole bunch of different things. Drought resistance, increased growth, disease resistance, what else? Things go better. And it often doesn't take very much, but it's going to take a lot of whatever. If you talk about how much corn and soybeans there are in the Midwest, that's a lot of seaweed, folks.
And just to sort of add, it's with fertilizers are very carbon intensive as well, just to produce man-made fertilizers.
Right. So there's some really interesting movements going on right now, and a number of people are very interested in biostimulants. I don't call them fertilizers so much. It's not like just putting nitrogen on it.
Right, that's true.
It's a different game. I don't know if you guys. So that sort of answer your question, Rod?
Rod, I think that the answer is that it shifts over time. And what I mean by that is, right now, so seaweed, as was said, you can make anything really out of seaweed, and which is really amazing. The potential is absolutely mind-boggling. However, it also requires a lot of energy to do that. And right now, our energy portfolio, at least in this state, is not necessarily green enough to do the most ambitious kelp products at any sort of reasonable climate deficit. So I think initially, the more efficient items, like I like the idea of, honestly, we're starting with a lot of food, and then we move on to biostimulants. And then I do think in time, particularly when, maybe we have more offshore wind, we have more access to clean renewable energy, that we can use that energy and make fuels, carbon neutral fuel out of kelp. That's incredibly useful. You could run that fuel all over the world right now. We just need the clean energy to make that fuel. So I think that we shouldn't aim at a singular product, but we should aim at a cascade over time as other pieces of infrastructure fall in line to kind of unlock the full potential of kelp and seaweed.
You guys should talk about the fact that you're both in the Mariner program from ARPA-E, right? The Advanced Research Project Agency focused on, or Advanced Research Project Agency of Energy, which is a specialized branch within the DOE. So we're in the Sharks program, and as we've been speaking to each other, it turns out they're in the Mariner program. And the Mariner program has been all around seaweed to serve as a biofuel. And now there's a new program that's looking at extracting rare earth minerals from seaweed. So, those are things where the energy affiliated with seaweed and how that can come into play is really important. So, it's...
Yeah, there's all these different things. I was just going to say, one of the bioenergy things really interesting. I'm working on a project right now is rare earth elements, which are these really obscure, very hard to find elements that are critical in making magnets for all these, like cars and all this kind of stuff we're doing now, for electronics, neodymium, plasmonium. I can't even name all these names of these things. There's about 17 of them. All critical. The question I've been asked is, how much seaweed does it take to make a cell phone? And it turns out, quite a bit. 150 million cell phones sold every year. That's seaweed, folks. Water, most of the concentration of rare earth elements in the ocean is like 10 to the minus 12. Seaweeds are bioconcentrated to 10 to the minus 6th, 10 to the minus 5th. We can refine it to 10 to the minus 2nd and replace the ore that's currently being mined primarily in China at the moment. So there's a very keen interest in where we get these things so we can all have our cell phones and electric cars. Who would have thought this? This has been around for a while, but all of a sudden everybody's going, "Whoa! Here's something else you can do with seaweed." And again, the ARPA-E folks are working on this.
And Tom, can you just, again, for members of the audience who may not know, where are governments looking to source a lot of these rare earth minerals, and how can seaweed sort of,
So
replace
basically,
that?
again, the seaweed can be grown. It will bioconcentrate the rare earth elements out of seawater. Okay, and then you can refine the seaweed further to come up with an ash, essentially, that's equivalent to the minerals, the ore that's being mined. They can then go into the regular sort of rare earth element ore refinement process.
And because there's also a lot of interest in deep sea mining as well.
This is a whole separate thing. This is not a mining operation. This is basically just taking seawater out of the bay right there,
Right.
and running it through an aquaculture facility.
Right.
Right. And then we're looking very carefully at the economics of this thing. That's where's the power come from to do all those kinds of things? How do you monitor those farms? How do you keep track of them? This all connects together. That's,
Great.
yeah.
Thanks.
Well, we're all in this together, folks. It's an ecosystem, and you have to look at it that way. Anybody in this room has got something to probably contribute to that effort in one way or the other.
Yeah. I saw another hand up. Right. Yeah.
I was going to ask exactly what he just discussed, but further than what you went on with, have you worked on the economics? If you can get it down to 10 to the minus 2, you know how much that costs compared to rare earth provision from China?
We got a whole crew of economists working on life cycle analysis and looking at the whole thing as much as possible. I mean, I begin to realize that RPE is saying, you not only get to do it, but you need to tell us how it works and what it costs, and what's the carbon cost of these things.
Right, right.
So
is there a
that's being done. There's a team of people that are working on that.
Is
And
there
that's another part of the fun thing. You can not only work with economists, you get to work with systems people and engineers, as well as people working about, photoreceptor systems, That's my fun these days.
Would it ever be a solution to the sargassum problem where you have tons and tons of sargassum that need to be ashed?
The sargassum problem is, good question. There are people looking at that very carefully from a biomass standpoint right now. Can you turn it into biomass for bioenergy? Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, regarding robotics, I'm wondering if you're studying the different needs for different types of kelp. So let's say macrocystis and then sugar kelp, and then actually the farm needs over time. And then the third part of that is, are you considering a leasing model?
Those are such exquisite questions. Yes, to all. We are wide open. We are trying to learn. So at Blue Robotics, we don't farm kelp. We make robotics. So we have to learn what is required here. And what you're talking about, all of those questions, that cluster of questions involves, in my opinion, a relationship and partnerships with actual farmers, really getting our technology into their hands, supporting them, learning from them, so that we can compile all of those lessons and give, with our technology, that kind of what I call the social technology, the actual ability to use it in the right way. So we have partnered with the Darling Marine Center with the University of Maine, and this winter we will be doing a series of studies on test farms there involving optimal harvest timing. One of the interesting things about the Maine harvest is that there's a dramatic per acre yield difference from one farm to another, and this largely has to do with slight changes in the water that cause certain farms to grow a little faster than others. So we're trying to work with them to figure out how to help these farmers know when to optimally harvest. And over time, our partnership with Ocean Rainforest here, they have one of our ROVs, they use it all the time. And over time, it will break, it will run into its own mechanical limits, and then we will learn from those limits. And we will try to improve our products and learn how a farmer can get through that. Just like in the old days when your John Deere tractor broke, and it would, you could get out there with some wrenches and a hammer and bang on it, and it would work again. And so we want to learn from the farmers and go through that experience hand in hand together so that we can be trusted and know that our products will work in this setting.
Hi. So my question goes back to economics and policy side. Just wondering if you guys could expand a little bit on how to economically incentivize both corporations and thus governments to invest in these kinds of things, because we know that not just aquaculture, but also sustainable ag, organic farming, these things are being held back by the lack of investment and that also public support because of fear of these transitions from an economic standpoint. So I was just wondering if you guys could talk a bit about that and how we move forward on that.
So I guess from the perspective of a startup, I mean, it's a very difficult situation that we are in when it comes to blue economy technologies, because generally, especially on the power generation side, it's still pretty nascent. So finding private equity to invest into that has been extremely difficult. I've pretty much just given up, and I just look at DOE because they do have the funding and they are pushing that. And generally, kind of in the process of technology development, if you can achieve federal grants to de-risk the technology, that is a pretty viable path. And after a while, you know, you have to find your first early adopters. That's a lot of work. And that's kind of a big part of what we're doing here, is understanding who is willing to take the risk and letting them know, okay, at the beginning, you're not going to have to pay for this. You're helping us out. You're helping out the general sector overall. We're all going to learn from it. We need to advance the technology readiness level. And then at that point, you can start to interact more with those investors that would really help you propel and grow. But it's very, very challenging, and kind of ties into permitting, restrictions associated with that. And we were talking about California having like really big goals for renewable energy, but then at the same time, you present them with a technology that could help in that, and you're going to spend 3 to 4 years, maybe even more, trying to get a permit. And for a startup, you're going to die well before that. I mean, the company's going to go belly up in a year or two. So that's where the federal government is playing a big role in that, and just kind of hoping that we maintain an agenda that really favors that is all we can kind of really work towards.
Okay, I would offer that one of the more interesting incidences, I want to say, here happened right here in Northern California when the kelp disappeared. And we had 2 fisheries that suffered from that. And that triggered an enormous amount of interest in the California Sea Grant. The fisheries people in the state of California all of a sudden went, whoa, this means something, kelp disappearing. And people began to tie all these different things together. And there was a big effort made to educate legislators, regulators, and so forth about what the actual importance of this resource was. I think that, to me, was a real interesting opportunity that I think you all took to now say kelp is important, and here's how it's all connected to the communities, to the resources, to the economics, if you will, of this region. A case history, if you will. And I certainly take that message to Washington and saying, what if all the kelp in the state disappeared? What happens to your salmon? What happens to your orca whales? You know, that kind of stuff. Make those connections.
I like to get funky with this answer because I think we tend to be a little bit constrained, which is not a problem, but let's get a little funky. So a couple of things. One is up in Alaska, I learned that they have this ferry. It goes from, Alaska's pretty isolated. So they have a ferry system. It's a boat. This boat burns fuel. I'm like, we should power this boat on kelp fuel. It should just be we should pass a law, and it's going to be really expensive. What if it was 20%, Tom? 20% kelp fuel. Let's create a demand for it. I think that what the government can do is we can pass a rule. Here in California, we have this big fleet of aircraft that fight our fight our forest fires. We could fuel part of that fleet on kelp fuel. Would it be expensive? Yes. We do lots of really expensive things here. So we could do this, and that would create a demand-side draw, which would then alleviate the problem of, Tom, what do we do with the kelp after we grow it? Which I agree is important. So I think, yes, the biostimulants. We could have a law in California that some percent of biostimulants that are transacted in our state need to meet a certain threshold of kelp in it. I mean, we can do that. And so I think that is another avenue to create a demand for kelp products that would really help the market.
So just to follow up, it sounds like you're trying to let the audience know they really need to engage with who?
Your goddamn elected officials. Ladies and gentlemen, this needs to be a collective vision that we communicate. We do not have, that's why this festival is so important, because it gets us together and it helps us share kind of the state of play of where we're at. But we do need to put pressure on our elected people. They need to know this story. They need to know that, hey, this is great. The people dig this. There's an opportunity for jobs. There's an opportunity for economic advancement and growth. And there's an opportunity for us to hit our climate goals. And that's the sort of win-win that I think we can all get behind. So that's the way to do it.
Any other questions for the panelists? We have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, I just want to do a brief announcement. A lot of people were asking if there is extra tickets for the Madacade. There is one leaving at 2:15. So if you have not been to the Madacade, they are touring the seaweed farm that we have, also the oyster farms, and it's coming back here. The trip takes about 40 minutes.
Right. Thank you, Raphael. So any questions for the panelists? Okay.
Thank you. I've noticed at this festival and elsewhere that really costly and complicated permitting processes seem to be holding up the production side as well as the innovation side, right? I didn't know about the renewable energy issues around that. Is there room? There's been some success in creating entities that hold umbrella permits like Humboldt Port in San Diego and Green Wave in Connecticut, which makes it much simpler for a farmer or an innovator because they only have to work with one entity rather than 17 different federal. Is there room for that on not only the production side, but on the renewable energy side to kind of remove that roadblock that you're facing?
You're talking about sort of a national sort of approach to this?
It could be regional, like the Greenway one is for Connecticut.
We'll turn this over to the woman who does it.
So I'll try and answer it as best as I can because I personally don't review permits, but I think it's always on a case-by-case basis for very good reasons, especially with permitting with any sort of aquaculture farm. You have to do an assessment of what's happening in that location. So what happens in Maine is not the equivalent of what the situation is in California. Different animals involved, different types of protected marine species, but even so, it's also going to depend upon scale as well. So if it's a demonstration farm, that could be very different than a commercial farm. And commercial farmers have different needs than a demonstration farm or a research farm would have. So it's a lot of factors to consider. If it were that easy, that'd be awesome. But it's also a democratic process. There's a lot of public hearings every time there's an operation that goes out in the water. They have to open it up. The government has to open it up to the public to make comments, which again, comes with communication about, NIMBYism. For folks that are not familiar with NIMBYism, it's not in my backyard. And it's really talking to those folks to tell them, what aquaculture is and, if you're a farmer, what you're trying to do. And I'm looking at someone sitting in the audience who's very good at communicating with his community. Do you want me to call you out? No. Okay, so Ken Sparta, who's an oyster farmer and a kelp farmer in Maine, is a perfect example of even before his farm went in the water, he went to the community, he went to lobstermen, because lobstering is big in Maine, and he made sure that they got to know him and understand his operation. And he's had a lot of challenges, but he's been able to make it happen and then develop a customer base at the same time for his kelp. So he's always welcome in the room, which is something I think that's really helpful, not just for his farm, but all the other farmers in Maine and really on the East Coast as well. Do you have a comment to make? Yeah, so, okay.
I want to sort of maybe put some other thoughts in your head. I am an owner of a large farm in Indiana that grows corn and soybeans. Been there since the 1840s and have been multiple generations of managing that farm and kind of see it, how aquaculture in some way is a development or part of agriculture in many different ways. And what I would encourage everybody here to think a little bit about is you look at the world of agriculture and what it consists of and what makes it go. It's a huge, huge industry. And you need to think very carefully about what problems that were faced with that industry, how they solved them, and also where you may not want to go, i.e. you may not want to go down some of the paths that they've taken in land-based agriculture. Two things that I worry about, one is disease. We haven't talked much about that here, disease issues and people working on disease. When we start doing this at any kind of scale at all, it's going to happen. Nature abhors a monoculture, okay? Simple as that. The other one that people are beginning to really think about now, genetics, strain selection, heat-resistant kelp strains, all these sorts of things need to be put into the mix. And I was looking down the path even further, think a little bit about, can you go to a bank and get a loan for a kelp farm right now? Like you could if you were going to go to a bank and get a loan for buying a combine? Is there a John Deere in the world that makes equipment for aquaculture? Those sorts of long-term things, when this industry becomes more mature, how do those things happen? Insurance, co-ops, big deal. How do you go at co-ops? And if you back away a little bit, I always think a little bit of, I'm going to call it the social equity in all this. We are offshore using water that is a commons. And it is you have to think a little bit about it being a commons. A little different game rules in the game than on upland. And there's some differences there you need to think about. Who benefits? Do you want one company controlling the whole business, or do you want to have small farmers? There's all that sort of social side of this thing that I think be thinking about. I'm not having any solutions, but I'm saying just put in the back of your head, down the road, those will be things we'll need to be thinking about. Innovation, if you want to call it that, but things to think about.
So final words, we're going to wrap up now. What do you hope, panelists, will come out of all of this, all of these initial efforts, like seaweed festivals and everything that we're talking about now? What do you hope for?
So I think it kind of addresses a little bit of your question too, is like big challenges equate to big opportunities. So it does require a lot of conversation. There is funding out there. It's just a matter of getting the right group of individuals together so that it's, it's inclusive of many aspects of things. So, if you're an aquaculture practitioner and you're envisioning how do I make my farm more sustainable, there's technology out there, but perhaps you don't know about them. And jointly, you can pursue funding that can really help to innovate around many different aspects. And I think that's just, goes back to people not knowing about Powering the Blue Economy initiative. I mean, things along those lines. It's just something that you just got to bring together a lot of people from different sectors, and there is a path towards a lot of innovation that can really further along seaweed, aquaculture in general, renewable energy, climate change, all these different things that come together. So.
Okay. And Tyler?
I hope everyone has a really good time, first and foremost, and puts your mind and soul in a place where we are open to change the way we think about our identity as being an ocean citizen, a coastal citizen, thinking about the opportunity before us and thinking about what that means for being a member of this community. We should try to go to Seaweed Fest every year. We should be stoked for it, and we should be really stoked for the future that is like unfolding before our eyes right here, and it's really optimistic and cool, and we should have a really good time. It's a festival.
I can't say any more than that.
All right, thank you very much to our panelists, and they'll be around for the rest of the day. Thank you.